The scent of betrayal isn't always cheap perfume on a collar. Sometimes it smells like fresh paint in the guest room you've been banished to. For Catherine Westwood, 7 months pregnant, and the architect of her husband's social standing, the betrayal was an invoice left on the kitchen island. An invoice for king-sized furniture from Roche-Beaubois delivered not to the guest room, but to her master bedroom. Her husband, the private equity shark Edward Westwood, wasn't just having an affair. He was moving his mistress into their life, into their bed, while his unborn child grew in the womb of the woman he was displacing. But Edward underestimated Catherine. He thought he was breaking a fragile doll. He had no idea he was unleashing a queen. And her first move was to turn his own kingdom, his sacred home office, into a war room, with his worst nightmare at the helm. The Westwood penthouse on the 72nd floor of 15 Central Park West wasn't a home. It was a statement, a declaration of war won on the battlefield of Wall Street, curated to perfection by Catherine. Each piece of art, from the Rothko in the foyer to the Calder mobile that danced in the breeze from the terrace, had been sourced by her. She had transformed Edward Westwood, a brilliant but brutish analyst from Ohio, into a New York titan. She taught him which fork to use, which artists to name-drop, and which charities to shower with just enough money to be noticed, but not audited. Their life viewed from the outside was a masterpiece of calculated perfection. Edward, with his sharp suits and sharper smile, was the engine. Catherine, with her effortless grace and a Rolodex that was the envy of every socialite in the city, was the polished, gleaming chassis. And now the final piece was being added, an heir. A son, the scans had confirmed, due in 8 weeks. But for the last 6 months, a crack had appeared in the porcelain facade of their marriage. It started subtly. Edward, who had once craved her input on every deal, now grunted monosyllabic answers from behind his laptop screen. His phone, once left carelessly on the nightstand, was now perpetually face down or in his pocket. He started staying late at the office, his excuses flimsy and coated in a transparent layer of condescension. "You wouldn't understand, Cat. It's complex." Catherine understood complexity. She understood the nuanced brushstrokes of a Degas and the intricate politics of a museum board. She certainly understood when her husband was lying. The final irrefutable proof came not as a lipstick stain, but as an alien scent. It was Santal 33, a fragrance so ubiquitous among the city's ambitious 20-somethings that it was practically a uniform. It clung to his cashmere sweaters, faint but persistent. It was not her scent. She wore Guerlain's Le Heure Bleu, a classic, timeless fragrance Edward once claimed he adored. She decided to wait. A direct confrontation would only lead to denials and gaslighting. Edward was a master of that. He could convince a jury the sky was green. So Catherine watched, gathered her strength, and endured the silent, lonely dinners in their cavernous dining room, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday. It was grey and raining, the kind of day that made the city feel like a cage. Catherine was arranging a delivery of hydrangeas when Edward came home early, a rare occurrence. He didn't have his usual briefcase. Behind him stood a young woman, probably 25, with sharp features, a blunt blonde bob, and a look of defiant ownership in her eyes. She was clutching a designer suitcase, and she smelled faintly of Santal 33. "Catherine," Edward said, his voice stripped of all warmth. It was the voice he used for hostile takeovers. "This is Chloe Bennett. She'll be staying with us for a while." The world tilted. The hydrangeas in Catherine's hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. She looked from Edward's cold, resolute face to the girl Chloe, who was brazenly scanning the apartment, her eyes cataloguing the value of every object. staying with us?" Catherine's voice was a whisper, but it cut through the tension in the room. In the guest room, I presume, Edward let out a short, humourless laugh. He walked over to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, his back to her. "Chloe works with me. There's a big project to merger. It's easier if she's here." Chloe smirked. "The hours are just crazy." She added her voice, a saccharine drawl. Catherine placed the flowers down her hands, shaking slightly. She would not cry. Not in front of this interloper. "The guest room is prepared. I had it cleaned yesterday." Edward turned, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. His eyes were like chips of ice. "Actually, no. The guest room is a bit small, and the bed is only a queen. Chloe is used to more space." A cold dread, heavier and more suffocating than any fear she had ever known, began to seep into Catherine's bones. "What are you saying, Edward?" He took a sip of his whiskey, his gaze unwavering. "I'm saying she'll be more comfortable in the master. You can take the guest room. I've already had your things moved." It was the casual cruelty that shattered her. Not just the affair. Not just bringing her here, but the calculated demotion, the methodical stripping of her status, her place, her home. He had moved her things. He had erased her from their shared space while she was out buying flowers for the table. She was no longer the lady of the house. She was a guest, an inconvenience. Chloe's smirk widened into a triumphant smile. She glided past Catherine, her suitcase wheels clicking softly on the marble floor, and headed down the hallway toward the master bedroom. Their bedroom. The room where their son had been conceived. Catherine stood frozen, the sound of blood roaring in her ears. Edward watched her, a flicker of something, guilt, annoyance, crossing his face before it was replaced by stony resolve. "It's for the best, Cat," he said, as if discussing a minor stock fluctuation. "Let's not make this dramatic." But it was already dramatic. It was a declaration of war. And as Catherine stood there, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, she felt a new kind of strength hardening within her. It was cold and clear and sharp as a shard of glass. He thought he had won. He thought he had broken her. Edward Westwood, for all his market predictions and financial genius, had just made the worst calculation of his life. He had forgotten who he was dealing with. He hadn't married a trophy wife. He had married a strategist. The guest room was lovely by any objective standard. It had an ensuite marble bathroom and a small balcony with a view of the Lincoln Center. It was the room her own parents stayed in when they visited from Connecticut. Now it was her cell. Piled neatly on the bed were her things, her clothes, her books, her jewelry box. Someone, a housekeeper, likely acting on Edward's cold command, had packed up her life and deposited it here. The most intimate items, her maternity wear, her prenatal vitamins on the bedside table, felt like artifacts of a former life. She ran a hand over a tiny folded onesie she had bought just last week. It was grey with little white clouds on it. A wave of nausea, entirely unrelated to her pregnancy, washed over her. She didn't scream. She didn't throw things. The shock was too profound, leaving a hollow space where the rage was supposed to be. For an hour, she simply sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the closed door. She could hear faint sounds from the rest of the penthouse. The murmur of voices, Edward and Chloe, a cork popping, champagne, no doubt, the clink of glasses, a burst of high feminine laughter that grated on Catherine's every nerve. They were celebrating her exile. That night she didn't sleep. She lay in the strange bed, the mattress too firm, the pillows lacking the familiar indentation of her own head. The scent of the room was generic, clean, the smell of a hotel. Sometime after midnight, she heard the master bedroom door close, and the distinct sound of the lock clicking into place. The finality of it was a physical blow. The next morning, the new reality set in with brutal clarity. Catherine emerged from the guest room to find Chloe in the kitchen, wearing one of Edward's silk robes, making coffee as if she had lived there for years. She didn't acknowledge Catherine, just hummed to herself as the espresso machine hissed. Edward was already dressed for work, reading the Wall Street Journal at the kitchen island. He looked up as Catherine entered. "Morning," he said, his tone clipped. "There's coffee." "I see that," Catherine replied, her voice dangerously calm. She walked to the refrigerator and took out a carton of orange juice, pouring herself a glass. Her hands were steady. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. "Chloe and I are going to be working from home for the next few days to get this merger deck finalized," Edward announced, not looking at her. "We'll need the office." The office, Edward's sanctuary, a glass-walled room off the main living area. It housed his Bloomberg terminal, his deal trophies and files containing the architecture of his empire. It was his throne room. "I see," Catherine said, taking a slow sip of juice. The day was a parade of calculated humiliations. Chloe would walk through the living room, talking loudly on her phone, discussing the very merger that was the pretext for her presence. She'd ask Edward's opinion on a slide, draping herself over his shoulder. They ordered lunch in Sushi Catherine's favorite, but they didn't ask if she wanted any. She was a ghost in her own home, a pregnant, powerless spectre, forced to witness the coronation of her replacement. The breaking point wasn't a single event, but the accumulation of 1,000 tiny cuts. It was Chloe leaving her makeup strewn across the master bathroom counter, visible from the hallway. It was Edward calling her sweetheart. It was the way they would fall silent when Catherine entered a room, only to resume their hushed conversation the moment she left. On the third day, Catherine was resting on the sofa. The guest room felt too much like a cage when she overheard them in the office. The door was slightly ajar. "Can't believe how easy she's making this," Chloe said, her voice dripping with contempt. "I thought she'd put up a fight, scream or something. She just sort of deflated." Edward's reply was the true kill shot. "She knows her place. Catherine is practical. She understands the new arrangement. She's not a fighter. Never has been." Not a fighter. The words echoed in the silent, opulent apartment. He had completely and utterly misjudged her. He saw the grace, the quiet composure, the social diplomacy, and mistook it for weakness. He had forgotten that the most effective strategists don't scream and flail. They observe, they plan, and they wait for the perfect moment to strike. Lying on the plush velvet sofa, her son kicking gently inside, her Catherine Westwood finally allowed herself a small, cold smile. Not a fighter. Fine. Let him believe that. Let them both get comfortable in their stolen kingdom. She reached for her phone, her fingers moving with newfound purpose. She didn't scroll through social media or call her mother for a tearful confession. She opened her contacts and found a name she hadn't needed in years, a name saved under a simple, discreet heading, Counsel. She pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before a deep, calm voice answered. "Daniel Quinn." "Daniel," Catherine said, her own voice steady and clear as a bell. "It's Catherine Westwood. I'm sorry to call you out of the blue, but I find myself in need of your services." There was a brief pause on the other end. Daniel Quinn was not just any lawyer. He was the divorce lawyer in New York City, a man known for dismantling empires with a fountain pen and a perfectly worded motion. He was brilliant, ruthless, and ruinously expensive. He was exactly what she needed. "Catherine," he said, his tone shifting from professional to concerned. "Of course. Is everything all right?" Catherine looked across the living room towards the glass office, where her husband and his mistress were laughing. "No, Daniel," she said softly. "Nothing is all right, but it's about to be. I'd like to retain you, and I have a proposal. My husband has taken my bedroom. I think as a first step, I'd like to take his office." Daniel Quinn was a man who operated on a different plane of existence. While Edward Westwood built his empire with bluster and high-risk leverage, Daniel Quinn built his by understanding one fundamental truth: information is power, and the law is the weapon you wield it with. His office on Park Avenue was a hushed cathedral of beige leather and mahogany, a place where fortunes were unmade and new futures were forged. He met Catherine in a private consultation room, the kind with sound-proofed walls and a discreet box of tissues on the table. Catherine didn't touch them. She sat opposite him, poised and articulate, her pregnancy, the only outward sign of vulnerability. She laid out the facts of the past week with the detached precision of a surgeon describing a procedure. The mistress, the demotion to the guest room, the occupation of the master bedroom, the casual, soul-crushing cruelty of it all. She ended with Edward's comment. "She's not a fighter." Daniel listened without interruption, his steepled fingers resting beneath his chin. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, missed nothing. He had seen every shade of marital warfare, from screaming matches in the Hamptons to cold, calculated poisonings of reputation. But this had a particular brand of arrogance he found especially distasteful. "The sheer audacity is breathtaking," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "He didn't just cheat Catherine. He's trying to psychologically erase you from your own life before he even files the papers. It's a power play. He wants you to feel so worthless that you'll accept whatever crumbs he offers in a settlement. He thinks I'll take the country house in Greenwich and a stipend and just disappear." Catherine confirmed, her voice hard. "He is mistaken." "Good," Daniel said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Now, about your proposal. Taking his office. I love the poetry of it, but tell me the strategy." "It's not just poetry, Daniel. It's tactical," Catherine explained, leaning forward. "Edward's entire professional life is on the servers and in the files in that room. His personal financials, his correspondence with his partners at the firm, his deal structures, everything. He thinks it's his fortress. I want to turn it into our beachhead." Daniel's eyebrows shot up. "You want to set up our legal operations inside your shared apartment with him and the mistress present?" "Precisely. We have as much right to be there as they do. More in my case. My name is on the deed alongside his. The Westwood penthouse is marital property. He brought his affair into our home. I'm bringing my legal counsel. It seems perfectly symmetrical to me." Daniel Quinn leaned back in his chair, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. This was why he loved his job. It wasn't just about the money. It was the chess game, and Catherine Westwood had just laid out a brilliant, audacious opening move. "He'll try to have us removed," Daniel cautioned. "He'll call the police, claim we're trespassing. And you will calmly show them the deed to the apartment with my name on it, and explain that you are my invited legal guest present to discuss the dissolution of the marriage," Catherine countered. "No court would grant an order to remove a wife's lawyer from her own home when he is there for legitimate legal counsel, especially not when the husband has moved his lover into the master bedroom. The optics would be catastrophic for him." She was right. It was a checkmate before the game had even properly begun. Edward could either tolerate their presence fuming in his own home as they systematically dismantled his life from 10 feet away, or he could make a public scene that would paint him as a villain of cartoonish proportions. "Okay," Daniel said, his eyes gleaming with professional excitement. "We can do this. But we need to move fast and with overwhelming force. We don't just show up. We arrive with a purpose." He began to sketch a plan on a legal pad. "First thing tomorrow morning, my paralegal, Maria, and I will arrive. We will bring laptops, a portable scanner, and a printer. We will also arrive with the first volley, a summons and complaint for divorce citing adultery, and a motion for a temporary restraining order." "A TRO for what?" Catherine asked. "To freeze all marital assets," Daniel explained. "Every bank account, every investment portfolio, every credit card with his name on it. He'll still have his salary, but he won't be able to move, sell, or transfer a single significant asset without a court order. He won't be able to wire $1 million to a hidden account or buy his girlfriend a parting gift. We put a financial cage around him while he's still in the penthouse." Catherine felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the turning of the tide. "What about the prenup?" Daniel's face tightened slightly. "He mentioned you had one." "We do," Catherine admitted. "His lawyers drafted it. It's fairly ironclad. It protects all his premarital assets and a significant portion of the wealth generated by his firm. Let me see it. There's always a crack. Unconscionability duress improper disclosure, or my personal favorite, a lifestyle clause." "A what?" "Sometimes," Daniel explained, "a prenup will have a clause that lays out a certain standard of living that must be maintained for the spouse. If that standard is violated in a particularly egregious way, say by being kicked out of your bedroom for a mistress, it can sometimes trigger penalties or even invalidate certain sections. It's a long shot, but let's see what we're working with." Catherine reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. She had retrieved it from her personal safe 2 days ago. She handed it to Daniel. He read through it quickly, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. He hummed, he nodded, and then on page 7 he stopped. He read a paragraph, then read it again. A low whistle escaped his lips. "Catherine," he said, looking up at her with a newfound respect. "Who was your lawyer when you signed this?" "I didn't have one," she said. "My father insisted on reviewing it. He's a retired appellate judge." Daniel grinned. "Your father is a legal artist," he said, tapping the page. "Edward's lawyers put in a standard infidelity clause. It adds a small financial penalty for adultery. Your father, it seems, added a morals codicil to it. Paragraph 7b. It states that in the event of flagrant and public infidelity, which brings humiliation and emotional distress upon the other party, including but not limited to cohabitation with a paramour within a shared marital residence, the wronged party is granted. Listen to this. Temporary and exclusive control over designated marital properties for the purpose of securing legal counsel and ensuring a fair and equitable discovery process." Catherine stared at him, uncomprehending. Daniel translated. "Catherine, your father put a clause in your prenup that says, if Edward ever did exactly what he just did, you get to take over the office. He basically handed you the keys to the castle. We're not just guests in his office. We have a contractual right to be there. This isn't just a good move, it's legally bulletproof." Catherine thought of her father, a quiet, scholarly man who had always viewed Edward with a polite but deep-seated suspicion. He had seen this. He had anticipated a betrayal of this magnitude and planted a single perfectly worded bomb in the middle of their marriage contract, just waiting for the right moment to be detonated. "So, Catherine said, the full weight of her advantage finally settling in. "What time do you and Maria arrive tomorrow?" 9 a.m. sharp, Daniel replied, closing the file. "I suggest you get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow the siege begins." The next morning, Catherine rose early. She showered, dressed in a simple but elegant cashmere dress, and did her makeup with a steady hand. When she walked into the kitchen, Edward and Chloe were already there, laughing over something on Chloe's phone. They fell silent as she entered the air thick with their shared contempt. Catherine ignored them. She calmly prepared a tray with a teapot, a cup, and a small plate of biscuits, and carried it into the living room. She sat on the sofa, facing the glass-walled office, and waited. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the chime of the private elevator echoed through the penthouse. Edward's head snapped up, annoyed. "Are you expecting someone?" he demanded. "I am," Catherine said serenely. The elevator doors opened, and out stepped Daniel Quinn, looking immaculate in a tailored navy suit, followed by a sharp, dark-haired woman in her 30s, holding 2 rolling briefcases. Edward's face clouded with confusion, then suspicion. "Who the hell are you?" Daniel strode into the room, his presence immediately commanding the space. He didn't look at Edward. He addressed Catherine directly. "Catherine, good morning. This is my senior paralegal, Maria Cortez." "Daniel, Maria, thank you for coming," Catherine said, gesturing toward the office. "You can set up in there." The color drained from Edward's face. He finally understood. "What is this? What is going on?" he sputtered, getting to his feet. Chloe watched from the kitchen island, her smug expression replaced by one of alarm. "This is my lawyer, Edward," Catherine said, her voice even. "He and his associate will be working from the office for the foreseeable future." "Like hell they will," Edward roared, his face turning a blotchy red. "Get out of my house, both of you." He pointed a trembling finger at Daniel and Maria. Daniel didn't flinch. He simply turned to face Edward for the first time, his expression one of bored professionalism. "Mr. Westwood, I am here as the invited legal counsel of your wife, Catherine Westwood, a co-owner of this residence. We have work to do." He then placed a sheaf of documents on the marble coffee table. "Also, you've been served." Edward stared at the papers as if they were a coiled snake. Summons for divorce, petition for asset freeze. He looked from the papers to Catherine, his eyes wide with disbelief and fury. "You're divorcing me. You're freezing my assets. Are you insane?" "I believe prudent is the word you're looking for," Catherine replied, taking a calm sip of her tea. While Edward was reeling, Maria Cortez had already wheeled her briefcases to the office door. She opened it and began to efficiently set up, plugging in laptops and connecting a small silent scanner. "You can't do this," Edward bellowed, taking a step toward the office. "That is my private space." "Actually," Daniel said, picking up a second document from his briefcase. "It's not. According to paragraph 7b of your prenuptial agreement, which you signed on June 12, 2018, in the event of flagrant and public infidelity, Catherine is granted temporary and exclusive control over this specific space for legal purposes. You breached the contract, Mr. Westwood. We are simply enforcing its terms." Edward looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. The prenup. He barely remembered reading it. His lawyers had called it standard. He had signed it without a second thought, eager to get on with the wedding. He stared at Catherine, who met his gaze without blinking. "You planned this," he hissed. "No, Edward," she corrected him gently. "You did, when you chose to bring your mistress into our home. I'm just responding." Chloe, sensing her position was suddenly precarious, came to Edward's side. "Edward, call security. Call the police. Have them thrown out," she urged, her voice shrill. "Go ahead. Daniel invited. "Call them. We can have a nice chat with the NYPD about why a 7 months pregnant woman needs legal protection in her own home from a husband who has moved his lover into the marital bed. I'm sure the New York Post would love that story." "What do you think the headline would be? Wall Street wolf kicks, pregnant wife out of bedroom." Edward paled. He knew Daniel was right. The scandal would be ruinous. His partners, his investors, the conservative boards he sat on, they would crucify him. He was trapped, utterly and completely trapped in his own glass and marble monument to success. He backed away, breathing heavily, and slumped onto a bar stool, defeated. He watched in impotent fury as Maria finished setting up. A printer whirred to life. A laptop chimed on. The hum of legal machinery now filled his sanctuary. Daniel Quinn walked into the office, surveyed the setup, and then turned to look out at the living room. He nodded at Catherine, a silent acknowledgement of a successful maneuver. The siege had begun. For the rest of the day, Edward and Chloe were prisoners in the penthouse. They huddled in the kitchen, speaking in angry whispers. Every half an hour, the printer in the office would spit out another document, a subpoena for Edward's firm, a request for depositions, a demand for a full forensic accounting of every financial entity he controlled. Each sheet of paper was a fresh assault. Maria worked with quiet, terrifying efficiency, scanning documents from Edward's own files he couldn't stop her from accessing thanks to paragraph 7b. Daniel spent the day on the phone, his voice a low, constant murmur as he spoke to accountants, investigators, and other lawyers lining up his pieces on the board. At 5:00 p.m., Daniel and Maria packed up their things. "We'll be back at 9 tomorrow. Catherine," Daniel said as they headed for the elevator. "We made good progress today." He handed her a file. A list of the accounts, frozen by the temporary order. As of 11 a.m. this morning, he can't even buy a cup of coffee with a joint credit card. After they left, a heavy silence descended on the apartment. Chloe looked at Edward, her bravado gone, replaced by a greedy anxiety. "What does this mean? Edward frozen assets. Is our future secure?" Edward didn't answer. He was staring at Catherine, who was calmly reading the file Daniel had given her. The woman he had dismissed as a decorative, fragile object was now calmly presiding over the dismantling of his life from a velvet sofa. He had kicked her out of the bedroom, and in return she had moved an army into his fortress and put his entire empire in chains. He had thought he was a wolf. He now realized he was the one in the trap, and it was a trap of his own making. The next few weeks descended into a surreal state of domestic Cold War. The penthouse became a bizarre, partitioned territory. Edward and Chloe were confined to the master bedroom and the kitchen, their world shrinking with each passing day. Catherine, Daniel, and Maria commanded the office and the living room, their operations expanding. The daily 9-to-5 presence of Catherine's legal team was a form of psychological torture for Edward. He was a man accustomed to absolute control, and now he was forced to watch powerless as the architecture of his life was X-rayed and dissected. The quiet hum of the scanner was the soundtrack to his unraveling. Maria Cortez, with her serene efficiency, was his chief tormentor. She would occasionally emerge from the office and politely ask, "Mr. Westwood, could you point me to the files for the Westwood Horizon Fund or two? I can't seem to locate them." Edward would just glower, his silence a confession in itself. The asset freeze was a tighter noose than he had imagined. His corporate card was declined at lunch. His personal accounts were locked. He was forced to use the dwindling cash in his wallet, a humiliation for a man who measured his worth in 8-figure wire transfers. Desperate, he called his own lawyers a bulldog team from a top-tier corporate firm. Their advice was blunt and infuriating. "The prenup is a disaster, Edward," his lead attorney, a man named Peterson, barked over the phone. "This morals codicil is airtight, judge-written no less. Any attempt to forcibly remove Quinn from the apartment will backfire spectacularly. You have to ride it out." Riding it out was proving impossible. The pressure was mounting not just at home, but at work. Word of the asset freeze, though sealed, had inevitably leaked. His partners at the private equity firm, Westwood and Cole, were getting nervous. "Edward, what the hell is going on?" his partner Robert Cole demanded in a tense meeting. "We've got the final push for the Aerotech acquisition, and I'm hearing whispers that your personal finances are on ice. You can't be a liability right now." This was the real leverage point, and Edward knew it. The Aerotech deal was a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that would make or break their firm for the next decade, and Edward's reputation was key to getting the financing syndicate on board. This desperation was the real reason Chloe Bennett was in his apartment. It wasn't about love or even lust. It was about survival. Chloe's father, Richard Bennett, was a ruthless tech billionaire, the very man they were trying to outbid for Aerotech. Edward's plan had been to use his relationship with Chloe as leverage, either to glean inside information or to broker a backroom deal where Bennett would back off in exchange for a piece of the new entity. It was a snake's gambit, and moving Chloe in had been a high-risk, high-reward move to prove his commitment to her, and by extension, her powerful father. Now that gambit was blowing up in his face. Meanwhile, in the office-turned-war room, Daniel Quinn was digging. He'd hired a forensic accountant named Kenji Tanaka, a quiet genius who could make spreadsheets sing. "There's something not right here, Daniel," Kenji said one afternoon, pointing at his screen. They were on a conference call with Catherine. Edward's declared income and assets are massive, obviously, but his personal expenditures over the last 6 months are bizarrely low for a man of his means. He's living like an upper-middle-class dentist, not a private equity king. He's hiding money. Catherine stated not as a question, but as a fact. "He's been preparing to leave me for a long time. He's hiding it somewhere the TRO can't reach," Daniel mused. "Offshore, but where?" The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Chloe. Her initial defiance had curdled into a sullen, anxious resentment. The glamorous life she'd envisioned, weekends in St. Bart's black-tie galas, a hefty divorce settlement for Edward that would become her nest egg, had been replaced by being cooped up in an apartment with a fuming, increasingly impotent man, and the constant, unnerving presence of his wife's legal team. One evening, Catherine found Chloe alone in the kitchen, scrolling furiously through her phone. "The life of a kept woman isn't quite as fabulous as you imagined, is it?" Catherine asked coolly, pouring herself a glass of milk. Chloe looked up her face, a mask of anger. "This is your fault. You're trying to ruin him." "No," Catherine replied, her voice soft but firm. "He did an excellent job of that, all by himself. You're just a symptom of his disease. Greed." "You don't know anything," Chloe sneered. "He's smarter than all of you. He's been planning for everything. He told me he was protecting our future moving assets to where his vulture partners and his naive wife couldn't touch them." Catherine's heart beat a little faster. "Protecting them where?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. "None of your business," Chloe snapped. But the mask slipped. In her haste to sound important to prove she was in on the secret, she had revealed a crucial piece of the puzzle. He wasn't just hiding marital assets from Catherine, he was hiding them from his business partners too. Catherine immediately relayed the conversation to Daniel. "He's embezzling Daniel from the firm." The information galvanized the search. Kenji Tanaka widened his parameters, looking not just for transfers from personal accounts, but for irregularities in the capital accounts of Westwood and Cole's investment funds. It was a needle in a haystack of global financial data. 2 days later, Kenji called. His voice was electric. I found it. It's brilliant in a sociopathic kind of way. He explained. Edward hadn't just opened an account in the Caymans. He had created a shell corporation, a limited liability company registered in Delaware named CB Holdings. He then used that LLC to act as a consultant on several of his firm's deals, billing exorbitant fees for strategic advisory services. These fees were then paid out from the firm's expense accounts and wired directly to CB Holdings. From there, the money was funneled to an untraceable bank in Switzerland. CB Holdings, Daniel repeated slowly. Chloe Bennett. He named the damn shell company after his mistress, Kenji said with a laugh. The ego. It's always the ego that gets them. It was the smoking gun. This wasn't just a divorce case anymore. This was wire fraud, embezzlement, a matter for the SEC and potentially the Department of Justice. Daniel called Catherine immediately. We have him, he said, his voice grim but triumphant. We have him completely. The question is, what do you want to do with this information? Catherine looked out the window at the glittering lights of the city. She could destroy him, ruin him utterly, send him to prison. Part of her, the part that he had wounded, so deeply craved that biblical retribution. But then she placed a hand on her belly. Her son would be born in a matter of weeks. What kind of world did she want to bring him into? One defined by his father's sins and a legacy of public disgrace, or one built on the foundations of her own strength and quiet victory? I don't want to send him to jail. Daniel, she said, her voice clear and resolved. I want him gone, and I want the keys to the kingdom. The air in the penthouse was unnaturally still, charged with the static of an impending storm. Catherine sat on the plush velvet sofa, her posture erect, her hands resting calmly on her swollen belly. She wasn't nervous. The time for nerves had long passed. What she felt now was a cold, clarifying purpose, the same feeling a surgeon must have before making the first critical incision. This wasn't about revenge. It was a necessary amputation to save a life, her life and that of her unborn son. Daniel Quinn sat beside her, a black leather portfolio resting on his lap. He was the picture of calm authority, an anchor in the turbulent waters they were about to enter. Across from them, an identical sofa sat empty, waiting. At precisely 4:00 p.m., the private elevator chimed. The doors slid open to reveal Edward, flanked by his lawyer, a bulldog of a man named Peterson, whom Catherine recognized from corporate galas. Edward had dressed for battle, wearing a dark, pinstriped suit like armor. He strode in with a manufactured confidence, a man who believed he was coming to dictate the terms of surrender. He glanced at Catherine, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, as if her very presence was an inconvenience he would soon dispense with. Catherine, he said, his tone clipped and devoid of warmth, or, let's hope your counsel is as sensible as you usually are, and we can resolve this unpleasantness quickly. Peterson smirked, dropping a heavy briefcase onto the floor with a thud. He settled onto the sofa, radiating aggressive energy. All right, Quinn, he began, forgoing any professional courtesy. We've reviewed your preliminary filings. A lot of dramatic flair, but not much substance. Mr. Westwood is a busy man, so let's cut to the chase. He understands his wife is emotional at this time. He gestured vaguely at Catherine's pregnant form. So in the spirit of generosity, he's prepared to offer a settlement that is more than fair. Peterson leaned forward, ticking off the points on his fingers. The house in Greenwich, free and clear. A lump sum payment of $10 million, tax-free. And a monthly alimony stipend of $50,000 for 5 years. It's a handsome package. She can live comfortably, raise the child, and we can all put this unfortunate chapter behind us." Catherine and Daniel exchanged a look so fleeting it was almost imperceptible. It was exactly as they'd predicted, an offer designed to sound magnanimous while being in the context of their shared billion-dollar fortune, an insult. It was a deal offered to a problem, not a partner. Daniel allowed a small, tight smile to touch his lips. "A generous offer, Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm sure you believe that. However, we're not here today to discuss your client's proposal. We're here to present ours." At this signal, Maria Cortez, who had been standing silently by the office door, stepped forward. She carried not a heavy briefcase, but a slim, deceptively light file folder. She didn't hand it to Daniel, but walked directly over to Edward's lawyer and placed it on the marble coffee table before him. "I suggest you read this before you continue your performance," Daniel said, his voice losing its silken edge and taking on the hardness of steel. Peterson scoffed, picking up the folder with a dismissive air. "I doubt there's anything in here that—" He stopped mid-sentence as he opened it. His eyes scanned the first page. The condescending smirk on his face faltered, then vanished completely. His florid complexion began to pale. He licked his lips, his gaze darting from the page to Edward, then back again. He frantically flipped to the next page, then the next, his breathing becoming shallow. Edward, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere, leaned over. "What is it?" he demanded. "What is this nonsense?" His eyes fell upon the top document, the certificate of incorporation for a Delaware LLC, named CB Holdings. His blood ran cold. Below it were bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, and finally, a meticulously detailed flowchart crafted by the forensic accountant Kenji Tanaka that acted as a map of his crime. It showed with irrefutable clarity over $18 million flowing from the expense accounts of Westwood and Cole through the shell company named for his mistress and into the dark, secret abyss of a numbered Swiss bank account. The world seemed to fall away beneath him. This wasn't a divorce tactic. This was an executioner's warrant. What is this?" Peterson finally stammered, the papers trembling in his hand. He looked at Daniel not as a rival lawyer, but as a man who had just revealed a bomb strapped to his chest. "That," Daniel said, his voice, now low and lethal, "is a copy of a file which, if I make a single phone call, will be messengered to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, and because I believe in thoroughness, to Mr. Robert Cole and the other board members at Westwood and Cole." He let the implications hang in the air for a moment. The charges would start with wire fraud and embezzlement, and likely expand from there. Given the clear evidence of intent, and the sums involved, a conviction would be all but certain. We're looking at a sentence of 10 to 15 years in a federal facility, and that's before we factor in the complete and utter destruction of your firm and your reputation. You'd lose everything before you even set foot in a courtroom. Edward felt the air leave his lungs. He stared at Catherine, a wild, desperate plea forming in his eyes. The Titan of Wall Street was gone, replaced by a terrified man dangling over a precipice. The woman he had dismissed, mocked, and cast aside was now the one holding the rope. He saw no pity in her eyes, only a chilling, resolute calm. "This is our offer," Catherine said, her voice cutting through his panic. It was the first time she had spoken, and her tone was as steady and unyielding as the marble floor beneath them. "It is not negotiable." Daniel took over, laying out each term like a nail in a coffin. "1," he began, his eyes locked on Edward. "You will cede full unencumbered title to this penthouse apartment to Catherine. The deed transfer will be signed today." Edward flinched. The penthouse was his monument. 2. The properties in Greenwich and the Hamptons will be signed over in their entirety to an irrevocable trust for your son to be administered by a trustee of Catherine's choosing. A direct hit on his legacy. His son would inherit from his mother's strength, not his father's name. 3. The entire contents of the CB. Holdings account and the corresponding Swiss account, we have the numbers, so don't even think about it, totaling $18,426,000 will be transferred to an account designated by Catherine. The transfer will be initiated today. The sound of his own theft being read back to him was a profound humiliation. 4. You will sign over 50% of your vested interest and future profit participation in Westwood and Cole. This will also be placed in the trust. Peterson made a choking sound. That's his career, his life's work. Daniel ignored him. 5. You will agree to a child support schedule based on your verified income from the last 3 years prior to this scandal. It is non-negotiable and will not be subject to downward revision. Catherine leaned forward slightly, delivering the final, most devastating blow herself. And 6, she said, her voice soft but absolute. You will vacate this apartment within 24 hours. You are to take your personal clothing, your shoes, and your toiletries. Nothing else. The art you pretended to understand, the furniture you sat on, the life you built on my back. It's mine now. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Peterson finally found his voice, sputtering with impotent rage. This is extortion. It's coercion. This document would never hold up. You're leaving him with nothing. Wrong. Daniel countered his voice like a whip crack. We are leaving him with his salary. We are leaving him out of a federal indictment. We are giving him his freedom. Frankly, it's a far better deal than the one he'll get from a prosecutor. And this document will hold up because the alternative is prison. You have 1 hour to decide. After 59 minutes, my finger starts dialing. There was no decision to be made. Edward knew it. He was utterly comprehensively beaten. The intricate web of lies and power he had woven had been turned into a net to ensnare him. He looked at Catherine one last time, searching for a crack in her resolve, a flicker of the woman he thought he knew. He found nothing but the cool, detached gaze of a victor. With a shuddering breath that sounded like a death rattle, he slumped forward. Give me the pen. Daniel slid the settlement agreement and a heavy gold fountain pen across the table. Edward's hand trembled as he signed his name over and over, each signature carving away another piece of his empire, his identity, his life. His once bold, confident slash was now the shaky, broken scrawl of a ruined man. When it was done, he let the pen drop. He didn't look at his lawyer. He stood up like an automaton and walked stiff-legged toward the master bedroom to pack what little was left of his life. Peterson, his face, a mask of defeat, stuffed the signed copies into his briefcase and fled without another word, eager to escape the carnage. Later that evening, the penthouse was quiet, except for the sound of Edward's suitcase wheels on the marble floor. As he headed for the elevator, a figure emerged from the master bedroom. It was Chloe, her face a mixture of confusion and anxiety. "Edward, what's happening?" she asked, her voice high and frantic. "Peterson just left. He wouldn't even look at me." "Where are we going?" Edward stopped and turned to look at her. In the wreckage of his life, he saw her with perfect, painful clarity for the first time. She wasn't a partner, a lover, or even an ally. She was just a transaction, a risky investment that had failed to pay off. His voice was hollow, devoid of all emotion. "There is no we," he said flatly. "It's over. The money's gone." Chloe's face fell. The calculation in her eyes was instant, cold, and brutal. The prize was gone. The golden goose was cooked. Her concern for him evaporated, replaced by the raw pragmatism of self-interest. Without a single word of comfort or farewell, she turned on her heel, went back into the room that had so briefly been hers, and began to pack her own bags. Catherine watched from the archway of the living room as they left separately, two ghosts departing a life that had been an illusion. The elevator doors closed, sealing them out forever. A profound silence descended, a quiet that felt clean and expansive. Her home was hers again. She walked slowly through the grand living room, her hand resting on her belly. She paused at the glass-walled office, the war room that had become the birthplace of her independence. It was her sanctuary now, the headquarters of her new life, her new empire, and she would rule it alone. Catherine didn't just win a divorce, she executed a corporate takeover of her own life. She transformed the deepest betrayal into her greatest victory, proving that true power isn't about shouting and dominance, but about strategy, intelligence, and a will of iron. Edward Westwood made the classic villain's mistake. He underestimated the hero. He saw a pregnant wife and presumed weakness, never imagining the queen who was waiting to make her move on the chessboard. Her story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous, and that hell hath no fury like a woman, not just scorned, but strategically brilliant. What would you have done in Catherine's position? Would you have sought revenge or justice? Who do you think was the ultimate loser in this story, Edward? For his wealth or Chloe for her ambition? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of resilience and ultimate justice resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat.